for simplicity's sake, let's just call this the floating hand technique. So with the floating hand technique, how should you angle your hand? It actually depends on you, depends on the player. I've seen just about everything. If you want to use what I would call the purest form of this technique, I would recommend that you strain out your arm like this, and then you let your wrist relax completely. If it's completely relaxed, it's like this, right? If I do this, no, that's not it. I'm forcing my wrist into a different position. This would be the ideal, well, not the ideal, but the purest position. Keeping in mind though that I've seen everyone do just about everything. When you adopt this position and you bring your hand here and you rest your, what do you call this, the elbow on the edge of the guitar. Again, some people are shorter, taller, and it will depend, but for me it just fits perfectly. And then you bring your hand here and you adopt this position. It's like this. And then you want to pretend that you're going to be picking towards diagonally like this. So if I exaggerate, it looks like this. It goes towards the body of the guitar. So it's not going straight down like this, or it's just going diagonally. Boom. So with this position, this quote-unquote pure position, it favors downstrokes. And when you do downstrokes, you let the pick or the hand rest on the next string, which is what we call a rest stroke. This gives you a much rounder sound as opposed to a free stroke. The act of just letting your hand fall and rest against that string, it produces this tone. So if you adopt this angle, it greatly favors the downstrokes as opposed to the upstrokes. It just makes sense, whether you're going in this direction or this direction. Because let's say if I pluck this string here, and notice as I go from string to string, my hand moves slightly to change the plane of attack. If I want to do, let's say I pluck the high E string with the down, and then my pick is here, and I want to do an upstroke on the B string, what do I have to do? I would have to literally bring my forearm here, and then it's just not efficient. Whereas if I'm flat picking, it's easy to do down and up. The plane of attack is always practically the same. Here in this angle, I can't reach the up. I can reach the up on the same string. But if I do a downstroke, let's say on the B string, I could easily reach the E string with an up. And some players do actually play like this, such as Moses Rosenberg. I'll talk about that later. So for this reason, generally downstrokes are favored. And when I was looking at these old books about classical mandolin technique, they talked about downstrokes as well. And even when they were talking about the shamisen technique, which is the Japanese, kind of like the Japanese guitar, or mandolin, whatever you want to call it, it's the same thing. They favor downstrokes as well. So when you do downstrokes, so this technique is not about speed, it's about sound. I generally do downstrokes when I'm playing melodies or slow songs, as opposed to just conventional alternate picking. Here it's just downstrokes to get this consistently round tone. So as I said, it's not about speed, it's about sound, and you have to train your ears to hear how you want to sound to get the best technique, to decide whether you do a down or up. We'll talk about this in some more detail later. So that's if you adopt this quote-unquote pure technique. But there are some players out there who adopt a different angle, maybe more or less straight. Dorado Schmidt is a little bit like this. When their angle is a bit more like this, it allows you to do alternate picking easier. And sometimes people vary the angle of the wrist. So it just goes to show that there are no rules. It ultimately depends on what kind of lines you want to play and how you want to sound. There are also players like Jorgi Löffler, a gypsy player from the east of France who uses this technique, but when he's descending the strings, he switches his angle like this to do, like, let's say, I'm not good at what he does, but he would do something like this. Oh. See, he just changes like this. So that's his technique. I would say though that most players adopt some variation of what I call the pure technique, with slight variations. You know, Angelo DeBar, Chavalo Schmidt, Stokla Rosenberg, Moses Rosenberg, I'm sure Django Reinhardt. Actually, if you watch videos of Django Reinhardt, yes. Joseph Reinhardt, his brother. Most players adopt some variation of the pure technique. And I'll talk a little bit about the alternative techniques in a bit as well. But let's continue with this pure technique. So you favor downstrokes. And then let's look at what kind of downstrokes you have. You have essentially a few different kinds of downstrokes. So you have a downstroke where you maybe rest your pick against the E string here, and then it's ready to attack, and you just let it fall. And let's say I want to attack the A string, you let it fall again, so on and so forth. In fact, all of this was just one stroke. That's what we call sweep picking. Then there's another downstroke to get more power, where you pretend you're holding a hammer and you whack the strings. You get more of an accent. And you're gonna alternate between these two downstrokes depending on the sound that you want. Let's say if I do an arpeggio, let's say just these 5 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah. I let it fall, so you get a really consistent tone. But if I want each note to be accented, see? So it's very, very important that you learn to listen to, or you learn to hear what you want to sound like in advance. This involves listening to a lot of your favorite players and to pay careful attention every time you play. Because a lot of guitar players, not just guitar players, but instrumentalists, have the bad habit of not listening to themselves, and it's just so important. So you have those two different kinds of downstrokes. Then you have the option of playing, for example, over the sound hole. And you can try this on different kinds of guitars too, but on these gypsy style guitars, when you play over the sound hole, you get a rounder sound. Nice for ballads. However, when you play here, you should not use the accented stroke, because it causes the strings to flap against the fingerboard. Quack, 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 quack. Quack like a duck. Don't Google that. Don't Google that. And then also, if you listen to some Django recordings, sometimes he picks closer to the bridge, not all the way here, maybe more around here, and you get this punchier sound. So you can experiment with the different sounds that you can get from the different locations. So when you're here and you pick aggressively, you get this nice punchy sound. If you listen to certain recordings of Django, especially on some of the faster songs, he gets excited and you can really hear that he's here. And there's certain recordings where you can hear him alternating between different positions.